We have two speakers from the USDA who will present veterinary organisms and vectors permitting. Dr. Abu Sayyib will focus on when a USDA permit is required for these organisms and vectors. Dr. Sayyib.
Thank you and good morning. One of the many functions of USDA is to protect American livestock and poultry, to protect them from infectious diseases that are exotic to US, that are transboundary animal diseases, and also to protect from spread and outbreak of infectious diseases that are already present in the United States. So the federal law requires that no organisms and vectors should be imported from outside of the country or from another state without a federal permit. The USDA VS permit is required to receive livestock and poultry pathogens from outside of the country or from one state to another state. These pathogens can be bacteria, virus, parasites, fungi, etc. To note that there is no USDA permit is required if the material is receiving from within a state. VS does not control intra-state transport. Intra-state transports are the authority of the local government or the state. VS also controls vectors that can potentially carry a pathogens. Insects are common vectors for many organisms. Mosquitoes are well known for that. Another type of vectors are the media. Any animal tissues or serum, eggs, that can be potentially contaminated with pathogens. So a VS permit will be required to import those materials. USDA required that you obtain a permit even to receive a killed pathogens and vectors and their derivatives. Consequently, you need a permit for antigens, vaccines, DNA, and RNA. USDA does not control every organisms. VS does not control the movement of non-pathogens, for example, yeast, commonly used in the baking industry, mold, lactobacillus. USDA does not control human pathogens. Human pathogens are controlled by CDC. However, a human pathogen, if it is also infectious to livestock and poultry, a VS permit will be required. Again, VS permit is required for importation of any organisms, despite if it is infectious to an animal or not, if it is a human pathogens or not, if the material has been exposed to any animal components, for example, FBS or eggs, because as I mentioned before, those FBS and eggs can be a potential vectors. To obtain the USDA permit, you submit a VS-16-3 application form, and you receive an interstate transport or import permit for controlled organisms and vectors. We call it VS-16-6. Again, no VS permit is required for in-state transport. To summarize quickly, when you need a permit, USDA controls movement of livestock and poultry pathogens and their potential vectors. So if a pathogen or vector is receiving from out of the state or out of the country, you receive a VS-16-6 permit. You also require a permit if the material, if the pathogen is killed, or a DNA or RNA extracted from a pathogen. If the organism is not pathogenic to livestock and poultry, you don't need a permit. However, if that organism has been exposed for storage or for culture in an animal-derived media or egg, including FBS. And if the material is coming from outside of US, an import permit will be required. So how to get the application process? My colleague, Dr. Dafisi, will explain and will go over some of these steps. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Saeed. The applicant submits the form VS 16-3, as Dr. Saeed has already mentioned. And for the rest of the process, we conduct the rest of the process within our program called e-permits. So an applicant submits a piece of paper, an email, or else they can submit it through our e-permit system. They can also fax. Any of those methods, the faxing, the email, or the piece of paper, all has to be hand entered into our data entry system. So I'm putting in a plug here for e-permits because it makes everything is easier for both the applicant and for us. There's less mistakes and it's a lot faster. So the data, most of the data is hand entered, and then as opposed to the CDC import permit program, we do have fees for our services. We collect fees at this point in the process. And we also determine the jurisdiction. Now, Veterinary Services, Organisms and Vectors shares an application with Veterinary Services Animal Products Permitting. So we determine which section it goes to. The next step is in the process. It goes to Sue Collins, who everybody probably knows has dealt with her. She assesses the completeness of the application, and she sends questions back and forth to the applicant that we might need answered. And she also sometimes communicates with Dr. Saeed and myself. I want to step back for a second. Each of these areas of our process is one individual is working on that area at a time. So when Sue is dealing with a permit, I don't necessarily know about it until she's done with it and she sends it to me. And the same for Sue. Sue doesn't get the permit until the fees have been paid and it moves on to her. The next step is it comes to the staff officers where we review the biosafety, the use of the material. Now we look at the biosafety of the lab. We look at what the material is, how it's being used, in order to determine if inspection is required. We look, as Dr. Saeed mentioned before, if there are products that were used in this material from another country, we need to find out what the country of origin of those products, the egg products, the FBS products, and in order to determine if additional testing or treatment needs to be done prior to approval, prior to movement, and then we approve the permit. So some best practices in permitting. The first one is electronic submissions through the e-permit system. I can't stress this enough, and I have a little slide to show you here in a second. People will send us things by mail, and then sometimes we get applications through overnight mail, and I understand why those are sent. People need a tracking system for their permits. But overnight mail is not speeding the process up as much as you think it might, because the overnight mail goes to one section. Somebody has to go down there every day to pick up the materials that are there. So your overnight mail can really be just as fast as regular snail mail. And there are all these processes that need to happen before the materials actually get to our draft examiner who drafts the permits. We need the payment, we need the information needs to be hand entered, etc. So email and fax are a little bit quicker, as you can see on this graph. And then finally, the e-permit system, if you can submit it yourself through e-permits, it's automatically in the system. We then would collect money, or if you have a user account, then pretty much you put the information in and it's ready to go very quickly. The only thing that needs to be done if you enter by e-permits and pay through e-permits is that someone has to assign the permit to the various stages of the process. The other frequently asked question or frequent thing that people are confused about is that our permits are for either import or interstate transport. They're not for both, because there are different requirements for import versus transport. The permit is for movement and receipt of the organism. We don't provide permits for shipping organisms. And I'm saying the permit is for movement and receipt because we don't actually regulate the use of the material. We want to know what the use of the material is so that we can determine if the biosafety practices are properly applied. But we don't regulate what the use of the material is. Our restrictions, as Vaughn said earlier, our restrictions also apply until the material is destroyed or transferred. The permits are usually good for 1 year, but those restrictions about how to handle the organism and what BSL level, those are for the life of the organism. And then we have some guidelines where no import permit is required, and those are listed on our website. If you want to move, transport, or import, you can use these guidelines, and you need to include a copy of the guideline itself, and there are usually some statements that are required that go with the guideline, and those statements need to be written down by the shipper for that material to move. Imports require a little bit more scrutiny by us, and so there are a couple of more best practices I wanted to discuss on imports. We'd like to have a full description of the agent with genus and species, whereas sometimes in our transport permits we have some blanket permits that include a variety of materials. In our imports, we want to know the agent. Bacteria should be subcultured 4 times, for isolation 4 times. Because we want to make sure that the materials are pure. We want to know the country of origin, whether animal origin nutrients or media were used, whether the materials were exposed to livestock or poultry, and the disease status of the exporting country. Because we're worried about things like foot and mouth disease, so that could be in sort of in the FBS that people might use to grow viruses. We're worried about classical swine fever, African swine fever. Materials such as pancreatic trypsin are often derived from pigs, so we want to know what country did that material come from, and was it a country that typically has classical swine fever, for example. We also want to know the method of inactivation if the materials are inactivated. Since our last webcast with the CDC, we have opened up a new web page, and this is the short link. We've been sending people there, but they keep on telling us, "Oh yeah, I've been there," but they went to our site last year, and last year at this time we didn't have this information up. We have very specific more specific information on organisms and vectors permitting at this website. It includes, do I need an organisms and vectors permit? And it includes a lot of frequently asked questions, including the links to the guidelines. They're all there. The guidelines for no permit required. We also have a list of foreign country disease status and the application form. This is our contact information. The 2 staff officers are myself, Dr. Deb Duffasy, and Dr. Abu Saeed, who just presented prior to me coming up here. We have this short link for our website, our web page. We ask that you send any email correspondence to this general mailbox so that the question can be appropriately routed. And our telephone number is listed here, and a fax number in case you would like to send a permit application through fax. Thank you.